So COVID-19 has taken away a lot of our social norms that we've had throughout our entire lives. How does that affect us, having all of that being taken away right now?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that happens is whenever there's uncertainty, we ourselves react to that uncertainty, and many times are more anxious, seem more down because, gosh, is this ever going to get where it needs to go? Is it going to be the same anymore? And so I think we have to continue to be in touch with our body and our thoughts, and continue to make sure that we're addressing that social connectedness. So whenever there's uncertainty, whenever we can keep the familiar, even if it's different, the better off we're going to be for our mental health. So while we may have gone to social gatherings and been in person with conversations, at least having virtual conversation or more phone conversations continues to keep that connectedness. Same thing with routines. You know, people may not be at work, or maybe have lost a job, and so now they're at home. And so that changes their routine. So again, anytime you can structure a day and build a schedule as close to what you are.
Oh,
Can you hear me now?
yes, I
I don't know
can.
how much wasn't on, but
Last
but when
part.
it, but whenever we can continue those structure routines, the better. I think also what happens in situations like COVID is that uncertainty makes us feel a loss of control. And so anytime we can take that back and just own it, and just say, okay, things are going to be different, but here's what I can do. I can structure my day. I can stay connected, even though it's not the best way I'd like to stay connected. And I can still do things on weekends. I could still have coffee virtually. So structuring those routines, and then of course just taking care of ourselves, eating right, getting sleep. When you're anxious, I think sometimes exercise and doing some activities, keeping your mind occupied with hobbies, with puzzles, all kinds of different things, whatever you enjoy.
Puzzles are all the rave these days.
Yes, that's what I've heard.
Now, kind of piggybacking off exactly that. Okay, piggybacking off the communication that we had just talked about, when parents used to go to those little league games, chat with their friends, get that connection, drive their children from school, have that communication with their kid, since that's gone, I know you had mentioned phone conversations, but how else can we keep that communication going and keep it strong?
Mhm. I think with parents and children, I think again, if you had a regular meeting on Tuesdays at 6 p.m., maybe you're not in person, but again, can you do that virtually? A lot of people have phones where you can still FaceTime or conference in people. I think young people are used to technology, and so that gives them an opportunity to see their friends and stay connected. And, you know, if it's softball practice and you can't do softball practice now, maybe somebody can still go out in the yard with you, you know, from your family. I think just trying to make sure that we're not creating our own barriers and say, oh gosh, the world is different and it's never going to be the same. But again, trying to take that control and keep those routines and connections as much as we can.
And checking up on our loved ones, on the elderly, why is that critical right now?
Yes. Well, you know, in general, elderly people that are living at home or even in care facilities, isolation is always a trigger or a precipitator of depression just in general. When our life changes and we have loss of control of being able to be independent and take care of ourselves, you know, that creates some challenges from somebody's mental health as well. And so I think that when you're in this situation, and a lot of the elderly also really enjoy touch, they enjoy hugs, they like to hold your hand, and now that makes it much more difficult. They're maybe, again, if they're not on a Zoom, maybe they only have phones, so sometimes they can't even see your face, right? And so I think touching base, which might be by phone, even more frequently. Let's say you used to call your mother or your grandmother once a week, make it more frequent. They always enjoy, or the elderly people tend to enjoy, written letters and cards, and those are things that we can still do too, and send pictures. Again, they are at risk for depression just because of their age and their life stage and challenges that happen to them. And so it's just critical that we really ramp up those connections.
And what signs can we look out for people that might be really struggling right now?
Sure. Well, it's Mental Health Awareness Month, and so I think that is critical to identify, how do we know when somebody's having some mental health distress? And I always challenge people, that there's lots of campaigns and things that we know about people having a stroke, and what are those signs, and signs of a heart attack. So I'm going to list some of the signs of mental health distress, because I think it's just as important, and probably now more than ever. So withdrawal or isolation. So what we look for is how people are connecting and engaging in conversation, and what changes are we noticing with people. So withdrawal. Also looking at mood and agitation. Maybe somebody was pretty easygoing, and now we're sensing more anger, irritability, and just a change. And so again, agitation. And then hopelessness. What's their world outlook like? Sometimes we have people that are just always so positive, and now we're noticing that they feel like the world is never going to change, or their life is very challenging, and almost like they don't want to live it anymore. And so that hopelessness, I think, is the third sign. The fourth is looking at personal care and activity changes. So again, if you're a person that has had a routine, you might notice that somebody is sleeping more, or they might be eating more, in some cases maybe using alcohol or drugs. They used to exercise, and now they're not exercising, or they used to always get up and put their makeup on, take a shower, and there's a change in that personal care and activities. And then the last one, signs, is really the personality. And just, again, looking at how the person appears as a whole, and what is their outlook, and what do they bring to conversations, and it just doesn't seem the person is themselves. So withdrawal, looking for agitation, a sense of hopelessness, that personal care change, and personality changes. And if you notice that, I think it's important that we ask a person, I've noticed that you're not as active as you used to be. Are you doing okay? How are you doing? So trying to have those conversations and encourage people to call their doctor. We have lots of helplines. There's lots of opportunity to just problem solve with people, reach out. And you mentioned earlier about connecting. And just as a family or a friend, keeping those connections so we can sense those changes.
Is it harder though, because you may not be in person, you may not notice these things in person when you would usually meet up? How can we be more alert?
Mm-hmm. I do think, and I'm going to share with you that we have a lot of behavioral health providers right now that are doing virtual meetings with their people that they serve, and phone calls in some cases. So I think we have to really be attuned to some of the things that we notice in their body language, if you're able to see them, but even in their tone of voice. As you're talking to them on the phone. And I think just if we have a sense that something they said seems like that shouldn't come from from them, that you're surprised about some statements, that's a time to just, dig a little deeper and start having a conversation with them about, how are they doing and what's frustrating and how can you help, and, trying to really identify where they're at.
And what's your advice for those conversations to try to avoid retaliation or denial? How can we go about those conversations?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I think that is fairly neutral in conversations is just starting by acknowledging how you're feeling. So if you're calling somebody and you're just like, oh my gosh, this world is just, it's so different. And, I had kind of a bad day today. And so I just really needed to hear your voice, and I really want to know how you're doing. And just kind of creating and setting the stage that you're not alone, that we're all in this together, and just acknowledging sometimes those shared experiences can get people to continue to share.
So put it on yourself a little bit, try to make it so they understand maybe how you might be feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
And kind of open that door up, that it's okay to talk about that we're not, that I'm not so worried about, your depression or your anxiety, but I'm feeling some struggles, and so I'm checking in on you, and how can I help you?
Very interesting. Very good.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think is the most important takeaway right now for people as they do deal with COVID-19, and however long this mental health aspect of COVID-19 goes on for?
Mm-hmm. I think it's like most things in life, that there are things that happen to us that we can't control. And so what we have to do is be able to take our own sense of control back. And we really have to do that about our health. And that's just not mental health, that's physical health. There are things, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that we can control. We can control our reaction. And sometimes it's just that simple, that we have conversations with each other about you're feeling down. And what are some of those things that give you joy? What can we do? How can we start to do things differently? Oh gosh, you used to exercise every single day, and you're not exercising every day. How about I come over and let's do a walk together? Or how about I call you and we'll walk together and we'll talk on the phone while we walk? So I think the biggest thing right now is we can control how we react. We can control how we behave, but it's just challenging when we have all those anxiety and depressive isolation thoughts. And so my best advice is just owning the situation is something we can't control, and trying to find every day something that we can control and make a difference. And then the other piece is we've got to take care of each other in our communities and families and people at work. And so staying connected as much as we can, even if it's different, can again identify challenges, but just keep things and spirits up as much as possible.
Absolutely. And my last question here is just looking at the outlook for the future. Do you believe that some of the things we experience right now through COVID could stay with us for a while? Or do you think these feelings and emotions that we're feeling are temporary and just given in the moment?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think for every individual, it is different. And so I think there will be people that will be impacted at varying degrees, and they will step into life maybe smoother than others. I think certainly people that already had maybe a substance use disorder or a mental illness, it may be slower, it may need some help. But one of the things we know about disaster types of events and behavioral health recovery is that many times people are so into the moment. Maybe they've lost their job and they're just, worried about their mortgage and trying to pay bills and finding another job. But the toll and the impact of that behavioral health will really roll out. Again, what we know about disaster is over a year or even a year and a half. there's kind of a cycle to how some of these more traumatic events happen. So there is absolutely going to be an increase in need over the next at least year and a half, if not more. Absolutely, for some people.
And what I find interesting is when we look back historically to something like the Great Depression, and then how after that generation became really penny saving, I wonder if maybe COVID-19 might make us washing our hands more, hand sanitize. I wipe my phone down now with a Clorox wipe every night because I don't want it on my bed. Do you think that might affect us and just how that culture's changed?
Mm-hmm. You bet. You bet. I think certainly some of those kind of safety or infection control things, because we've done them for so long, they almost will become a habit, and those are good practices. Absolutely. And in talking with our behavioral health providers across Nebraska, oh my gosh, they have done such an awesome job of staying connected with individuals that they serve, and they're doing it in different ways. And so one of the things that we've heard is there are some service providers that used to have no-shows, or people didn't come to their appointment. They had transportation challenges, maybe a scheduling issue, and so they didn't come into their provider. But because they're able to access services now in their own home, that there are some people that are busier right now. And just thinking about how we can use telehealth to reach people now and not have that transportation issue, for example, and serve more people. Telephone in some ways for some things may be still okay. Do we really have to do all in-office visits, for example, or is there a balance of the way that we reach out and engage people into treatment? I think there's absolutely going to be lots of lessons learned, and our future in behavioral health is going to look much different. And some of the things that that providers are sharing, I think it's going to be good, because anytime that we can serve people and remove barriers to access, we can reach more people and help Nebraskans get healthier.
Yeah, I think that's some of that new normal that we hear all the time, is that maybe after this we will have better communication, or we may have more access to telehealth and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see how that all works out.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
My questions, is there anything else that you would like to add just to let people know on how to deal with these troubling times?
Well, I think this month is, May is always Mental Health Awareness Month, and Children's Mental Health Month. And so I do think that we, even though this is a trying time and we maybe have brought attention to mental health because of how COVID is impacting us, really every day should be a day that we focus on mental health. And if we can continue to do that earlier and get people when they're just beginning to have some challenges, as opposed to not engaging, the better off we're going to be. And just by talking about this, so I want to thank you very much for this opportunity, because we have to normalize this conversation like we're talking about a heart attack or other physical conditions, because people will seek treatment, and that's the main thing. They'll feel better.